and knew it. And that's how I knew the intelligence agency or Homeland Security, all of them weren't as good as they thought they were, because there wasn't the notifications necessary to deter whatever has caused a code. I'm just admiring this setup of an operation. Reminds me of a crime scene, only on TV, but it's kind of like this. How intricate is the sewage system? Look at all these markings. That's fantastic. I can only imagine what they have to do with that sewer cap. What if we could treat sewage like a fertilizer and understand the art behind that? Perhaps it's no different than not hooking a cow up inside of a tank and shoving something in its rear end to try and save a planet from carbon, because that's where it's going. I've been video capturing permeated regions, not because I fancy myself an intellectual. Look at these right here. I just know the power of the third dimension, whereas the constants are in no coincidence, that everything is curved in space-time, even though it seems straight. And the faster you go, the more that objects that would seem curved start flattening out until they're flat. That's known as the Lorentz contraction. And actually, with just those two things being utilized, you can actually invoke a table of logs and find a big fish like Moby Dick. And that would be like a fish to fry when you're going for bigger fish to fry. I can't stress enough how much it's important to have a notification, and that needs to be upgraded, not even on a computer or a device. For one example, if you're doing a blinker to turn and you're just so happen to be the person pulling out from a turn, you would start pulling out because you think they're pulling in. However, the person's blinker was for 2 turns down the road, so they were passing. As you're pulling out, they were still going straight because their blinker is not prone to the turn that you're waiting to pull out from. Head-on collision. I mean T-bone. So what would be a great way to deter you from thinking they're turning in and yet still have them notify others on the road straight ahead that they're planning to turn more than one turn where you would be? It would be to invoke nothing too complicated, but something as simple as a blinder. This has been done on a stop sign in a city where they would have the blinder on the road that's going straight, have a little like blinder, and so the stop sign would be only seen from the side view where it was permeated to be prone for. Because in a virtual reality is something that like an AI would be reading a lot better than what you could. So that doesn't mean that you're ever wrong just because it has all the right answers. And one thing that you can read when you're in the wilderness or inside of a ditch would not be as clean as what an AI could read, but it doesn't mean that you aren't able to have a table of logs do just the same thing and then produce better because you're alive and it isn't. And so it would always be questioning the thing that it can't. So like when you're in a library and then they have used book sales, they don't know how dirty each page is. And so all the books inside the entire library, they don't know how dirty all the pages are. But if you're to add all that up together, that's a specific amount of bacterial load, one of which you should be able to know. And it's to that degree what you should know what is inside of an upgrade in a phone each time that you would have to do that. That was like easily better to look at, like the polygons. But then when they're put into time, like time is the third dimension, that's probably like logs on a table. It would be kind of like what an array is in how like computer coding has the series and sequence and series. So it would be like what a table of logs is could reinvent what a service provider is if you could just make it on your own. And then you could bypass any of the crappy call supports that would go out if your phone loses contact. And your phone would lose contact if you're not constantly updating it. That would be their excuses. You need to update your phone, where that's just another way that AI would be warning, making little warnings and making it not do good enough unless you update it constantly, which is the craziest thing if you don't even know what the update is consisting in doing. But then again, there's just fantastic things that are constants. It's not by coincidence that glowing objects are enhanced by black light. That's the purple UV ray. And so that inside mathematics is something like a table of logs. If that was so great to have, that could correlate to a whole different line. And I feel like I'm back in grade school where the news is trying to explain what a warning is instead of explaining possible attributes that would contribute to a solution. I guess that's the dark horse of computing, whereas a computer is so accurate, it's just that it could never have a random number generator. Whereas you would think the most enriched batch would be for it to start at the most random point in order to achieve the most accurate estimate. It's unable to do so. And that's why cell life is so great if it can be abundant, because it's probably utilized off of randomness. The science of reality. It's an algorithm that is non-negotiable because it can't be deducted. Algorithms are not conscious, when your cells within your body could look so much like an algorithmic representation. But lo and behold, cell life is not comprised of switches, of what bits fire off of what bits fire off of in order to make computations complete. And the difference between that, the more that you don't utilize it or the more that you do, comparing on if you're doing it by yourself or by a device, would bottleneck each time if you fall short-handed, whereas you would just compromise. And the more that you moderate for that, you very well may end up no different than a piece of that's how a ribbon is formed. And if you're trying to make brushels, it's almost the same, but except if you use a sickle and you thrash it, it's not going to roll unless you look very closely. And if you're looking really closely, and why all the different nutrients are so great is that if you have the straw and then if you're looking really closely at some of the different types of straw, some of them, if you're doing the ribbon technique within a thrash, you might see that like the really special stuff would have something like dough. If you make little worms and you roll it, and then you would try and like braid them together and then you would try to make that into a ribbon. It would be extremely difficult unless you were to stick it into a kiln. And then if you were to stick it into a kiln, it would start to get brittle. Nonetheless, if you take it out at just the right time so that it didn't completely solidify, and then you tried to scrape it and make it into a ribbon, it would be like a really interesting straw that would have that